All right, welcome everyone to this week's training. My name again is Annaleah Hilker. I am the onboarding teacher manager, so I do a lot with the onboarding process. Today, I wanted to go over just one of the types of child abuse. There are multiple other types, so we will go over each one individually in their own slides as well, just so that we can make sure that the information we're getting is good information, and if we have questions, we can answer them as we go. So the one that I wanted to talk about today was neglect. Before we even get into that though, if you suspect that a child is a victim of abuse, we are mandatory reporters as caregivers. For us, because we aren't in these daycares as often as others are, so we might not know the full situation surrounding the child. If you suspect that there's abuse going on, let the center director know why you think that is. And the center director can at that point let you know if this is actually a problem or not. This is the number to call if you suspect abuse. With this as well, because we're mandatory reporters, we don't need evidence or proof. It's just if a child seems odd or is showing these signs, you can call and they will get involved. Okay. So types of abuse, there are 5 different categories. These are physical, sexual, verbal or emotional, mental or psychological, and then neglect. Again, we will go over the other 4 in later trainings, but today I wanted to focus heavily on neglect. So the definition of neglect is frequently defined as the failure of a parent or other person with responsibility for the child to provide needed food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision to the degree that the child's health, safety, and well-being are threatened with harm. So that's a lot of words there, and I will go over more in depth kind of what neglect is. Hold up. Let's make sure that we are muted. There we go. So yeah, I'll go a little bit more in depth about what this actually looks like. But basically a parent or guardian, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, but parent or legal guardian that has responsibility for a child. They are responsible to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and supervision, whether that's them watching the child or again, them coming to a child care center. If they are unable to provide those needs, it's not necessarily neglect, but we'll go over that again in a second. So here, what constitutes something as neglect? So what neglect is having the resources, but not providing them to the child. So it is intentional. You know that you have food and you could be making meals for a child and you are intentionally choosing to not feed that child. So again, it's a choice. It's this, I know that I could provide food, I could provide shelter, but I, as the responsible adult, am choosing not to provide that. That is what neglect really is. So again, we'll go over some signs of what this could look like, but a child that consistently misses daycare or is frequently absent from school, that can be a sign, because the parent would have the ability to get the child there, but is simply choosing to not make sure that that is a priority for them. So what it is not is being homeless. If a family is in a poor financial situation where they're unable to provide, and then again, lack of provisions. These aren't constituting as neglect because you don't have the means necessary. So you're not choosing to withhold the provisions. It's a circumstance that is still very unfortunate, but it's not intentional, so it wouldn't, again, constitute as neglect. So just to make sure, so why would being homeless not be neglectful to a child?
Because they simply don't have the resources available to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that it says that neglect technically is not providing shelter, but if the whole family is unable to provide shelter, it is unrealistic to expect that they would be able to provide shelter for that child when they can't do so for the whole family. So signs of neglect. Before we jump into the ones that I have, what are some signs that you think could be that a child is experiencing neglect?
I would just say like the unkept, maybe, clothes are, haven't been washed in a while, or maybe wearing the same clothes each day. Maybe a bad smell.
Yeah, definitely.
Another really important thing to observe is how if they're changing physically, like if they're looking skinnier every day, that lets everyone know that they're probably malnourished.
Yeah, perfect. Other thoughts before I jump into my list? Jada said if they look dirty or smell, if they're always hungry. Yeah, definitely. Jada also said if they don't have proper clothing, like a jacket in the cold. From Avery, frequently sleeping during school, or if they're really hungry during lunch, sometimes stealing from or asking other kids for food. These are all good. Okay, Avery is Grayson, perfect. Yeah, those are all really good signs that a child is actually experiencing neglect. So getting into the ones that I have, the consistent poor weight gain or being overweight. So we had someone mention again, if they are losing weight at an alarming speed, or if they seem to never be able to put on weight, that is definitely a sign of neglect, a sign of poor nutrition. But on the opposite end, being overweight, as a natural protective response, if your body is not sure when or where the next meal will come from, it will grab onto and hold the fat from food. So sometimes you're actually overweight, even though you're not eating as much as you should be, just because your body has gone into a staying alive response, in essence. Another sign would be taking food or money without permission. They think that these kids sometimes think that even if they ask, you wouldn't be willing to give them food, and so they're going to take it without permission. They're going to see it and just grab it. Again, a sign that they're not being fed properly. They'll save food. So during lunch, If they are full, but they still have a little bit of food left on their plate, they might try to pocket it or put it in a napkin to save for later because they're not sure if they will actually be able to eat later in the day when they're at home. A reluctance to leave and go home. This can be a pretty big sign of a lot of different abuses. But neglect, again, if they aren't being taken care of properly, if they aren't being fed, if they aren't being hygienically taken care of, you know, those the baths, the getting their hair brushed, all of those things can make them not want to go home, as well as with neglect. A lot of these kids don't feel that love from their parent or guardian. And they would rather be anywhere else except for at home. And apparent lack of supervision. So again, if they are consistently absent from school or daycare, if it looks like they're the ones that are dressing themselves every day without any support or help, they are too young, but they're walking home, any of these things where they should be supervised, but they aren't being supervised, can be a sign of neglect. And then somebody mentioned wearing the same clothes multiple days in a row. Some kids have their favorite shirt that they want to wear over and over and over again. Typically in that case though, the parents will wash that shirt. Wearing the same clothes more so means that they are visibly unclean. They most likely slept in them as well. They are ratted or have holes in them. Any of these things where you can just tell that these clothes aren't being taken care of, that more so is a sign of neglect than just a child having his favorite shirt that he wants to wear all the time. Because again, typically in those cases, it is being washed. Lack of physical hygiene. Someone mentioned that they smell like they might smell like they haven't had a bath in a while. If a child consistently comes in and their hair is not done, they look dirty, they again are wearing the same clothes. Any of these things that parents should be making sure that their kids are clean and physically healthy as well. A lack of that can be a sign of neglect. And I should say a consistent lack of physical hygiene. If a child comes in 1 or 2 days and their hair is really messy, you know, parents have bad mornings too, and they are running late, different things like that. It's when it's consistent, it's week after week that these things are showing up. Before we jump into the questions, so again, signs of neglect, they're consistent. It's constantly being unsupervised. It's a decision that these parents are making to not do their hair, to choose to not give them a bath or send them in new clothes. All of these things are signs of neglect. And again, I will reiterate that because we are subs in these daycares, it would be better for us if we suspect abuse to talk to the provider or director, because they actually know the more consistent reality of that child. They would actually be able to recognize if this was a one-time thing or if this has been a pretty consistent thing. All of these situations are really hard, and it's hard to have to call in on them, but it is our job, it is our duty. We need to protect these kids. So that is why, as caregivers, we are mandatory reporters. Does anyone have any questions about anything to do with neglect, the signs, the definition, different things like that? Okay, perfect.